what we've got here is a dashboard, if you like, of the data from the pay index. And you can see that it's divided into various elements. If I look at the top left part of the dashboard, you've got in brackets, or you've got it on the x-axis at the bottom, number of years experience. And you can see here that across the whole data set, so this is anybody that's registered on the pay index, the peak earning by years of experience is between 26 and 30 years. And then it begins to drop off. So once you get to 30 years plus, you can see that you're earning substantially less than you were 5 years earlier. And I always think that that's such a, it just really brings home that, you know, the 26 to 30 years work experience is really your peak earnings. So that's what I would say in answer to your question on that one.
Wow, that's really interesting. How do you think education, you know, plays into that? Does it make a significant difference in terms of your peak earning potential?
Yes, it does. Again, if you look at one of the questions that we ask when people register, and I would also say, Colson, that the registrations are anonymous, as you know. So, but we ask what level of education you attained. So whether you are a school leaver, or whether you did an undergraduate degree, or a master's, a postgraduate degree, or whether you went on to do a doctorate or a PhD. And there is, across all levels of experience, so regardless of how senior you are, there is the more education that you have, the more, on average, the more you will earn, which I think again is not surprising. I mean, obviously there are going to be anomalies to this, as you'd expect, but yes, I would say, I mean, the bottom left diagram shows that. So if you look at the vertical bar chart, the PhD is earning the most, and we capture salary information, bonus information, as well as deferred compensation stroke LTIPs as well.
And James, if you don't mind me, maybe just kind of anecdotally, some of the clients that we see as the executive coaches also don't underestimate the importance of certification as well. And, you know, James, I don't know if you've seen this, but certainly in areas like accounting or technology where, you know, coding languages are important, that can make or break, right, as far as compensation as well. And I would just say lastly, as far as courses that you're taking as well, like when you're using LinkedIn, for instance, sometimes listing the courses that you're taking or you've taken before is also very helpful. So that's just kind of what we see. Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, you know, if you're an accountant and you're qualified by experience as opposed to having the certified or chartered, it makes a massive difference. It really does. And in some, obviously, in some functions or departments, you can't progress beyond a certain level, right, if you don't have those qualifications. So no, I totally agree with you. The one thing I was going to add, just for any user that's interested, is that for the purposes of this webinar, all the data is in pound sterling. So all the K's that you can see, it's a relatively senior data set here. So the average total compensation across everybody in the data set is £200,000. So and that's total compensation. So average salary plus average bonus plus average deferred. So you could obviously make your adjustments depending upon which salary or what your local currency is.
Right. You know, in terms of, we talked about, you know, years and education, how does the peak earnings vary by tenure for individuals?
Well, this again is really interesting. So that's the top right part of this dashboard that we're showing here. So again, this is on average across the whole data set. And what this is showing is that during the tenure of your role, if you look at the x-axis here, what you've got is months in the role. So we start between 0 and 12 months, so your first year. Then we've got 1 to 3 years experience, and then you can see how that works out. And you can see that the peak tenure, or the peak earnings in your tenure, are between 61 and 84 months experience. So that's your 5 years to 7 years experience, and then it begins to tail off. And again, Colson, I wonder if this is just an indication that that's when you should you should be addressing your compensation and coming into that. So I think I don't know if you see that, Simeon, as well when you meet individuals and they're looking for a new role.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why folks are looking to transition is because there is that plateau there, James, that you're talking about, where there's a correlation between the amount of experience that you have and so the expectation, the value that you have to provide back, right, which is then compensated. And when you don't see that kind of going up, then I think a certain degree of dissatisfaction settles in. So yeah, I do see that quite often.
And I also think that in some instances as well, if you're in senior management, then sometimes the CEO wants to bring in a new cadre of direct reports, and so it could be out. It could be out with the old and in with the new type situation. So, as you know, every company is different, or every organization is different, but these situations do arise, definitely.
Right. Another kind of interesting topic when we talk about, earnings is obviously the gender impact, peak earning potential, and, that gender pay gap. How does gender impact your earning potentials?
Well, again, I'm sure that Simeon and I'm sure that we've all got loads of information on this. So this dashboard here across the whole data set shows that there is an average. We always measure average and we measure median. Now, as the data scientists amongst us should only use the median, but the average is what typically gets quoted. And you can see the difference. So the difference between male and female, there's a 23% average pay gap, which is huge, and that's across the whole data set again. So it's very generalized information, Colson. The median is 9.4, which is obviously much closer. Unfortunately, even though that it is closing, it literally is there from as soon as you graduate all the way through to the top of the tree, all the way to senior management. You've got graduates, boys and girls, coming out of university, and they're potentially being offered different salaries, even though they've done the same course and they've got the same education, which personally I think is not very equitable. And I know that organizations are trying to stop that, but it does happen, I'm afraid. We do have a prefer to self-identify as well. And again, I would take those stats with a pinch of salt, because there are relatively few people that have ticked the box saying they prefer to self-identify. So I don't think that data is strong enough to really get to use in anger, if that makes sense. But the difference between female and male, absolutely.
And
yeah, I do see
that as well.
Yeah, I do see that conversation happening a lot. It's not always as overt, right? So when I'm engaging in coaching with a client, if she's female, there's that underlying kind of unspoken thing that I have to kind of pull that out of the conversation, right? Which is, why exactly is it one of the factors that you're not happy with where you are today? And part of it is that, I don't feel that I'm being paid or I'm being promoted at the same rate as some of my male counterparts. So, certainly that's very much out there. And then the dissection of, okay, well, what exactly do you do as far as adding value and apples to apples? That's an important conversation to have. And at the end of the day, the net is that, quite simply, there is a pay sort of gap there. That's quite obvious. So, dealing with that is a challenge, obviously.
So I've got a bit of a funny story. I say funny, but it's an empowering story here. So my daughter graduated relatively recently, I think 1 or 2 years ago. And she was looking at the data from the pay index and saw that in the role that she was interviewing for, she saw that there was a gender pay gap between male and female. And so quite not afraid of anybody, when she was going through the interview process, she said, you do know there's a gender pay gap for this role, don't you? I think you should be offering more money. And this was at the interview stage. So you're thinking, oh my goodness, that's very brave to do. But she got an extra 10%. She got a 10% uptick because of that. So I do think I guess that's the power of the data, isn't it? So if you can see this data and you're able to quote it, it does reinforce your position. So I am all for sharing this data. I think it's very powerful.
I mean, do you think that's something that, in terms of the clients you work with, advice you would give them for reaching their peak earning potential using data, or any other pieces of advice that you might have?
Yeah, certainly. And I do see some of the questions about sort of the industry as well. But this data, and it does vary as far as, so what does it mean to have equity, right? As far as output and outcome and salary. So, but certainly showing this data would be very powerful. We talk in percentages a lot in coaching, which is sort of, are we 10%? James was just referring to that as well. So, but the data itself speaks for itself. So.
Great. Do you have any other advice for candidates who might be looking to reach their peak earning potential, other things that they could do?
Yeah, I think the conversation really has to boil back down to value, right? If you can bring to the conversation instances, for example, as a sales, for example, director or VP, of how you've been able to elevate the bottom line by 10%, right, versus 5%, you can use that argument to say, well, that's why sort of on the upper end of the scale, I deserve that, right? And in many instances, the value piece of it gets missed. It's more like, well, have you read my resume yet? And I've got 25 years of experience. Why aren't you paying me more, right? But at the end of the day, they're compensating you based on what you can do now, here and now. It's not sort of what you've been doing for the past 25 years. So make sure that you do talk about value. Make sure that you give it thought as far as what does value constitute, right, in that particular role? What does it mean to them as far as the role's value proposition? The last thing I would say is just be very careful about sort of sounding entitled. Oftentimes you come in with, I've done this, and so I deserve this kind of a thing. There's a degree of confidence that you need to have, like James's daughter was saying, but it's also sort of like, there has to be humility in that as well. And that the human connection is very important for that negotiation element.
I think, Simeon, in that instance, she was lucky to get away with her lack of experience.
Okay.
I think if she was a bit older, it may not have been taken in such good heart. But every situation is different, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
James, before we go to our next poll, we actually have a couple of clarifying questions from the audience. They wanted to know if the compensation includes equity, if it includes total compensation, and then also, what geographies does the pay index cover?
Yeah, okay. Well, there are a couple of very good questions. So when anybody registers with the pay index through BlueSteps, they will be asked various questions about their compensation. They'll be asked what currency they're paid in, what their base salary is, what their bonus was, and then do they have any deferred compensation? And so the total compensation that's quoted in these reports includes those three elements. For the purposes of this webinar, we've lumped in the whole world together. So this is a data set question as opposed to individual. But when you are using this tool as an individual, you'll be comparing your compensation against your peer groups, and you'll see that when you register and sign up and see how that works. Did I get all of